Hello, everybody. It is Sunday in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. My name is Adam Bittner, assistant sports editor for Multimedia at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, joined for our weekly Steelers mock draft video by Christopher Carter, host of the North Shore Drive podcast on our Post-Gazette Sports Now YouTube channel. This is the video where we break down all of the various picks and mock drafts from around the internet, from some of the most widely read pundits out there in the draft world, and we put our Pittsburgh spin on them. Chris, this is your first stop here in draft season. Woo! We've had Ray Fittlepaldo, Brian Backo on. How are you, and how are you feeling about this draft?
I'm feeling all right, man. I'm excited. I said all along for months during the season, the Steelers need to be able to go after a defensive lineman in this class. And the more and more I explore the defensive lineman in this class, that is the heavy part of this draft class. And there's a few other heavy parts, but this is a really good year to need interior defensive line help. If Pitt wants to get two, they can get two in this draft class. If the Steelers want to get two, they can get two. And this is a chance for them to be able to make some progress there, but also corner, wide receiver, good drafts for those positions. Lots of fun guys to look at in this draft class.
Yeah, excited to dig into it. We're going to talk quarterbacks here at the top two. Obviously, quarterbacks get the buzz from a lot of people, including Field Yates of ESPN mocked Ole Miss's Jaxson Dart to the Steelers. So we're going to break that down. Got a lot of other positions to sort through too. So subscribe to the channel, like this video if you enjoyed it. Help us out with the YouTube algorithm. Before we get into it, just want to thank our sponsor for this episode of the podcast. It's Mike's Beer Bar down on the North Shore. Let me tell you about my favorite place to go in Pittsburgh, and that's Mike's Beer Bar on the North Shore. Whether you're in for the Steelers, Pirates, or Pitt game, Mike's Beer Bar right across the street from PNC Park has the best selection of beer in town. Amazing food options. They have over 20 TVs. You can catch all your favorite NFL, college football, Pirates, Penguins, Riverhounds, and Premier League action right at Mike's. Come on in and try one of their 500 different available beers, 300 of them being local beers, as well as over 80 different local craft beers available on tap. You can also get a flight and try out every option you can dream of. And trust me, you won't want to run out of favorites because I never do, and I'm always there. Try a steak on a stone or for an awesome meal where you can choose how you want your steak cooked with the heated stone right in front of you as you enjoy it a night out in Pittsburgh. Come to Mike's Beer Bar and get your sports fix at the best bar in all of Pittsburgh. Chris, let's get into this Jaxson Dart conversation. Field Yates said he likes the traits that he have, and that's why he bumped Jaxson Dart up from most other mock drafts I saw, second, third, sometimes even a fourth round situation. Are the Steelers that desperate for a quarterback, Chris? Because I don't think that they are to go reach and pull Kenny Pickett 2.0 type of situation, but tell me if I'm wrong.
I feel like this would be worse than Kenny Pickett 2.0 because, like, Kenny Pickett was at least the first quarterback drafted in that class, and it's like, all right, Ben Roethlisberger's gone. You get your first pick. Jaxson Dart, if selected, will be most likely the third, maybe even fourth quarterback picked in this NFL draft class. I don't see the first-round talent in him. I think he's more of a third-round guy, and if the Steelers got him in the third round, I could hear that a little bit more. But to answer your question, are the Steelers desperate at quarterback? Absolutely. You know, we just did our Friday episode of the North Shore Drive podcast with Brian Backo, and we did a quarterback draft, and it was just like, it was slim pickings for who you want to be the Steelers quarterback, veteran or otherwise, for the 2025 season opener. But Jaxson Dart does present some interesting qualities. You look at, he had some really good games last year. Like, he finished strong with the bowl game against Duke, 4 touchdowns in that one, 6 touchdowns against Arkansas. He's shown good traits. He wowed people at the Senior Bowl practice, setting. I look at things that he did, that he's done, and I think, hey, there's something to work with there. But I'm not bending over and trying to be like, oh, well, let's break up the whole draft process to get him. In the first round, where the Steelers sit at 21, they will have a good shot at either a top-tier DT, a top-tier wide receiver, or a top-tier corner, and not guys that you're rolling the dice really heavily with there. And those are all three positions that can make things well. I think if you're going for quarterback this year, you're waiting until those middle rounds. And if Jaxson Dart or Will Howard are one of those guys in the third or fourth round, and you get that guy, that's your solid win. But you got to make sure your first 2 picks in this draft class are addressing positions of need that build up the roster across the board and are really highly graded picks here. The quarterback class, this is not a great year to be going after quarterback, at least in my opinion. I'll say this, I haven't studied Jaxson Dart up and down, but the parts that I have, I'm like, look, there's promising things, but not like, yeah, give me that guy in the first round promising things.
Chris, another name that keeps popping up in that second, third, mid-round situation is Jalen Milroe from Alabama. I think we're going to see a lot more of him from people knowing how the Steelers, have that connective tissue with the Eagles and Andy Weidel, knowing that Jalen Hurts was the quarterback the Eagles were able to draft in the second round. has some mobility to his game like Milroe does. I guess if we're using Jalen Hurts as a template, Chris, how closely does Milroe fit that in your mind? Because I know I listened to the part of the podcast. You had a little bit of skepticism about Jalen Milroe. So I wanted to give you a chance to kind of break that down and what the differences might be for people with the Jalen Hurts.
His hands, I believe, are smaller than Kenny Pickett's. Like, if that was a complaint of yours, that's a complaint for him. But also, like, people compare him to Justin Fields, and that's the reason why he's getting linked to the Steelers a lot. But I don't think he's as fast as Justin Fields. I don't think he's as much of a playmaker as Justin Fields. Like, when Justin Fields was at Ohio State, like, Justin Fields would be making insane touchdown throws while getting rocked. I don't see Jalen Milroe doing that. I think he's a decent athlete in the college level. I think that he can be a good running quarterback that gets you like is a second or third option when you're in an emergency situation, or can work out the QB option and be a threat that way. But like, if you look at his Senior Bowl practice reps and some of the things that I saw, I mean, he was just, the ball was slipping out of his hand. He wasn't able to get the ball 10 yards downfield at times. He was just consistently being inconsistent, and inconsistently, inconsistency is a bad thing from a quarterback. I don't think he's a second or a third round pick in this draft class. So I'm staying far away from Jalen Milroe when it comes to that. If anything, I'm getting him maybe late fourth, maybe fifth, around there. I'm not as high up on him. Comparatively, I like Will Howard a lot from Ohio State. Like, the command that he had of the field, and we saw in the college football playoffs, is his ability to decipher defenses, to make tough throws in tight situations. That last throw that he made in the Ohio State Notre Dame championship game, where the Notre Dame sent the house at him, and it didn't matter. Big game, big situation. He knew he had to put it in a spot, and he went and did it. And those are the quarterbacks that I'm looking at in this draft class. Are guys that can do that more so. And Jaxson Dart, I think, has some of that in him too. And that's why, again, like, I'd be looking at them, but again, middle rounds, not early rounds. But Jalen Milroe, I don't think he's a now situation. I don't think he's a future situation. He could prove me wrong, but the things that I've seen, I don't think he's going to translate to the NFL very well.
One name you didn't mention there, Chris, that College Football Network did in one of their College Sports Network, did in their multi-round mock draft this week was Quinn Ewers from Texas. Obviously, he was playing deep into the college football playoff as well, has a lot of experience, but I looked it up. The NFL.com comparisons are rolling out on Lance Zierlein always gives his comps, and I think that's, it's not always right, but I think it's a good starting point for some of these conversations. He compares Quinn Ewers to Kelly Holcomb and Sam Howell, which has some pretty rancid vibe for me. And then you factor in that he's really struggled. A lot of people just wanted to see Arch Manning in there this year. The true freshman who should not be starting over a guy like Quinn Ewers, but people still were curious enough, and Quinn Ewers left enough to be desired. So what's your read on how he fits into this mid-round quarterback conversation for the Steelers?
I think he's on the back end of the mid-round guys. Like, I would take him after Dart or Howard. I think if you're getting one of those guys there, like, that's where a lot of this starts to blend together. Like, there's a lot of gray between the talent of these guys. He flashes moments where you're impressed with him, but there were legitimate reasons when he was just struggling, and Texas fans like, put in Arch Manning. He's a Manning. He's of the Manning family. That name carries a lot of weight. Those guys have worked out so many times in the past. Why not just get to the future now? But Quinn Ewers, again, 31 touchdowns, 12 interceptions. Those are good college numbers last year. And if he was able to translate to the NFL with those numbers, that'd be great. But I look at his traits, and I think that there's sometimes the processing on the field that needs to be a little better. His throwing motion needs to be a little bit better. I think he's a decent enough athlete. But I think that there's more he needs to show to be in that consistent upper tier level. If the Steelers got him again in the 4th or 5th round, fine. But again, you got to hit on a lot of other things, and he would be a project quarterback at best if you got him, as would most quarterbacks in this draft class.
Chris, let's move on to some other positions here. Chad Ryder of NFL.com did his 3-round mock draft, had the Steelers going Quinshon Judkins with the 1st-round pick. Listen, I love Quinshon Judkins as a running back, as a talent. Would I love to see him on the Steelers? Probably. Do I want to see them spend another 1st-round pick on a running back?
No,
absolutely not. So I guess tackle that notion first. A 1st-round pick on a running back. Explain to the viewers why it doesn't make sense, and then where does Quinshon Judkins begin to make sense for this team? If at any point.
Third round. Like again, just like, look, running back. when the Steelers got Najee Harris, they needed a guy who could tote the rock and protect the football. And he did that for 4 years. And that kind of bought them some time as far as while they figured other things out. Without Najee Harris, despite him never having supreme numbers, him getting 1,000 yards every year and rarely fumbling the football was a big part of what allowed the Steelers to stay afloat in a lot of their games over those 4 years. If there's a guy to draft in the first round this year for the Steelers, it would be Ashton Jeanty. He could be the level of play that he showed at Boise State. If you plugged him into the Steelers offense, they would still need a lot of work. Like, I still would not make him running back should not be the priority in the first round. It should be DT, corner, wide receiver, like one of those positions. But if you were to entertain it, Ashton Jeanty could be one of those game-changing type players who could be a big difference maker out of the backfield. Pair him with Justin Fields, and you might have, one of the fastest running back quarterback combinations in the NFL. Still need to see him tested and all that stuff. But if I'm going in a direction at running back, it's Ashton Jeanty in the first round. But I do like both the Ohio State running backs, Travion Henderson and Quinshon Judkins. But in the third round, not in the first or the second. I think that the Steelers, again, I think the Steelers are in a really good spot where one of those top needs are going to fall to them. Like, you look at how a lot of the big boards are assembled. You got your immediate guys that are going to get picked early, like some of the Michigan guys, Mason Graham, Will Johnson, Mason Graham, easily the top defensive tackle in this class. Will Johnson, also out of Michigan. A lot of people put him as the top cornerback of this class. And then you go to other positions, your Cam Warbs, your Duke Carters, you get guys like that throughout the list. And then, other guys like Tyler Warren, they're probably not going to be interested in because they have their tight end of the future right now from Penn State. But then you start to get into okay, what if Emeka Egbuka fell to them in the first round? He looks like a heck of a receiver. What if Benjamin Morris in the corner out of Notre Dame fell to them? He looks like a heck of a player. And then there's several defensive tackles, whether it's Walter Nolan or Shamar Stewart, who Ray Fittipaldo drafted to the Steelers about a week or two ago. Kenneth Grant, who's my guy. I love Kenneth Grant's tape. He's a guy that I've been staring at nose tackle for a while. Matthew Golden, the receiver out of Texas. And I know we're going to talk about some of these guys. Those are the guys you look at in the first round. Running back, just push it back. Position-wise, I think the Steelers, if they get upgrades at those positions, they're much closer to being a more complete team than if they were able to get a Judkins or say an Omarion Hampton out of North Carolina. And I like Omarion Hampton, heck of a player. I covered him when he played Pitt with North Carolina, but I'm staying away. This is a really good running back draft class for its depth. You can get guys like Judkins, like Devin Neal out of Kansas, third, fourth round guys. Awesome fit there. Not in the first.
Yeah, I think the depth is the big thing for me. It's one thing if there were 5, true running backs that you can imagine using with any frequency, but there's guys further down that I think if you pair them with a Jaylen Warren, or maybe you get some level of low investment free agent for a year or two, I think you have a lot of options to address that situation without putting your premium capital when you have so many needs. Among those needs, Chris, we've touched on it a little bit, but corner was something we highlighted a lot more last week. I haven't seen as many first round picks for the Steelers this week at the position. So I'm just going to go through some names, and I want to get your early thoughts on them. Denzel Burke, another Ohio State guy. I forget whose mock had him in the third round going to the Steelers, but Lance Zierlein knocked him for his man coverage a little bit, which is, the Steelers have increasingly leaned into, man coverage in recent years. Does that make it a non-starter for you? How do you look at Denzel Burke?
I think Denzel Burke, like man coverage is a big hold up there. People were hoping he would develop into, the next Denzel Ward when he was early on in his career, and that didn't necessarily happen. He kind of stayed where he was. I think he'd be a solid third or fourth round corner. But if you're looking to me, there's some guys you could get in the earlier part of this draft class, like Azariah Thomas out of Florida State. You could probably get him in the first or second round, and I think he would be a difference maker there. Maxwell Harrison, again, we're going to go over a lot of these names, but there's other guys I think would be better fit for what the Steelers are trying to do than Burke earlier. But say in the first 3 rounds, you get, Kenneth Grant, and Jaden Higgins out of Iowa State. Like you get two guys that you're just really good at these other positions, and then you still need a corner in the third, and it's like Denzel Burke versus Devin Neal. I can start to understand those types of pick, but even then, like I like Jacob Parrish out of Kansas State. I think he's smaller, but I think he's more of that man press, someone get in your face and jam you type of guy that would work there. And again, Azariah Thomas, I think he could do a little bit of that. I think and Maxwell Hairston could do a little bit of that. Darien Porter could do a little bit of that. And he's 6'4", like he
was going to be the next one I asked you about, Chris, because he's big. He has those traits that we know the Steelers love. That's been transcended. You can go back to Artie Burns. This is it didn't work out, but that's the prototype they look at.
Yeah, they want guys that can be strong, physical, go up, win the jump balls, but also be fast and quick enough to be able to do that. And he didn't allow a single touchdown this past season. He got 3 interceptions. I really liked the way that Darien Porter looked. And granted, there were some times where you felt like maybe if he played a little bit better competition at times, he would have been tested more. But there's other guys in this class to look at before Denzel Burke. I just think that he would be like a settling point where it's like, okay, maybe you find a way to move him around in your defense, and maybe he's a developmental project, but not one that I would pick and think, oh yeah, just plug him in next to Joey Porter Jr. and he's fine.
Speaking of guys you can move around, Trevor Sakema from Pro Football Focus had Jahdae Brown, the cornerback from Texas, going to the Steelers at 21. He seems very polarizing in these early mocks of like, I've seen him go in the top 15. And then I've seen him fall second, third round in some circumstances. Trevor makes the argument that, he's played all over the formation at Texas, inside, outside, even played a little bit of safety, that he could be a quote unquote chess piece for Mike Tomlin within that defense. But I always say that there's two ways that works. When you have a guy who has played all over the formation, is that there's probably a reason he didn't play outside until his senior year. And I think that's why he's so polarizing. Is some people see the traits, and other people see a guy who just couldn't match up on the outside in the Big 12. Let alone this season. Moving up to the SEC.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of it also, like when you look at his years, his senior years or his last year, 2024 season was the best season that he had. He had 5 interceptions, no touchdowns allowed. And the pass rating he allowed was like very, very low. Like he did a very good job that year. And in that year, he moved around. He did over 600 snaps at outside corner, but he also did about 120 so snaps at the slot corner. And that's a good sign when you can be that flexibility. He also played in the box a little bit, and that's you like that flexibility. And I think that when you look at his tape, he flexes out to be more of another zone guy when you look at his talents. But as you said, like there are flexibility points that can work for you in the Steelers secondary. And I think the Steelers secondary could use a guy that can both play the slot and the outside. I think Byron Murphy is a free agent who the Steelers could be looking at to do that type of thing. But Jahdae Brown, I think he could be a guy that could be a decent corner there, but I'm not jumping up as high for him. I know there's some people that are like, put him in the first round. I'm still a little skeptical. I have to say I haven't studied him in depth. I've just like seen some highlights here and there. I'm still going through. I'm really going through my D linemen right now. Corners are the second group that I'm looking at. But what I've seen out of Jahdae out of Texas, I think that he's I think he has potential like a lot of other guys. And I think that like if he's in there in the second round and you took D tackle in the first, that would be a very tough thing to pass up on because there's a flexibility there. But to your point, it would be nice if the Steelers had a guy who was just a really, really, really good outside corner, and then you could sign a slot corner and just have a veteran play in that position while you have Joey Porter Jr. and this really highly touted outside corner from this draft class become your 2 outside corners for the next several years together.
Yeah, I just think that if there is even a moderate level of risk that you're using a first round pick on a guy who ends up being a slot corner, I think you rapidly end up in a Terrell Edmonds situation where could be a good player, could do something that you need in your defense, but using the first round pick at the expense of some of these other needs, that's where it becomes a problem for me. So he's a guy that I would certainly be intrigued on later on. But you're right. I think we got to go through this evaluation process a little bit more before I'd feel comfortable with something like that in the first round. A name that keeps coming up in multi-round mocks on the defensive line, Chris, and I will note that as much as you are looking at defensive line, as much as Ray is looking at defensive line, as much as I'm looking at defensive line, it does not seem like a lot of mock drafters are at this point. And they very much like look at. It seems like they look at the Steelers. They say, "Oh, they need a defensive lineman as well, probably." And here we know Rylie Mills from his extended run at Notre Dame. He was in a lot of like glossy packages on TV, and I'm telling you, this is like the fourth or fifth time I've seen him connected to the Steelers. So, what's your read on why the national pundits don't seem to be looking at the Steelers defensive line very closely, and B, is Rylie Mills a viable mid-round candidate for you? If even if they got one in the first round, you talked about their ability to double up, get a couple of defensive linemen in this class. Is he a guy that you're looking at?
He's a guy in the very middle rounds that, like, if other guys didn't it worked out, or as a second pick that maybe. I mean, he is huge. He's 6'5", like that's 6'5", 300. That's a big guy. But I'd also be looking, like, I think that you can get one of those guys, or I like Deion Walker's another big guy. Now, granted, Deion Walker is a big guy who needs to get his shoulder pad lower. I think he has a lot of fundamental issues. I haven't studied Rylie Mills a whole lot to see like how his fundamentals are, but I do look at that as a big thing. And like early in this draft class, there's some guys that they don't need work on their fundamentals. They're pretty solid. Walter Nolan out of Ole Miss, Kenneth Grant out of Michigan. I really like Tyleik Williams out of Ohio State. Those guys are pretty good at that. I think there's other guys that you can get in the second and third rounds, maybe like Darius Alexander out of Toledo, who had the touchdown against Pitt in the bowl game. Alfred Collins out of Texas is another one. I like Aeneas Peebles out of Virginia Tech, a smaller guy at 6'1", but really quick and wins on the first step. There's plenty of guys out there that I think would be tackled. But to answer your question as far as why they're not looking at it, I think because what happens is we get to specialize on the Steelers, right? Because we see them all the time. We're in here, we're thinking about it. When they're looking at the Steelers, they're like the 12th or 15th team that they're looking at there, or the 21st if they're just going in draft order, right? So they're looking at and they're saying, okay, Steelers still need a quarterback. They didn't get a wide receiver this year. George Pickens hasn't blown up yet, and we're not sure about what corner. So you know what? We're just going to say these three positions, and those are three really important positions in the draft class. They'll probably look at the D-line and think, oh, well, they just drafted Keanu Benton, and they have Cam Hayward. They're fine. They don't need to do that there. And like, look, I think Keanu Benton's a fine investment. I think he's going to continue to improve for the Steelers. But this team needs that third defensive lineman, maybe even a fourth defensive lineman, to be able to have a rotation there a little bit more. And they need a true nose who can plug the A-gap, not get moved off the ball, take on double teams, and then make it so that if you're double teaming the nose and you're not moving anywhere, that's an investment as an offensive line on a given run play that's not going anywhere. And now you've all of a sudden left Keanu Benton and Cam Hayward one-on-one with their guys. And if they're one-on-one with their guys, most likely TJ Watt and Alex Highsmith are too, if they're double teaming the center guy and they're not getting any movement. And then if you're double teaming guys, not getting any movement on the offensive line when you're trying to do that against the Steelers defensive front, all of a sudden those linebackers can attack a lot more and they can see a lot more. They can do a lot more. And that's what the Steelers need. They need a guy that can do those types of things. If Mills can be that guy because of his size, and if he can be more consistently just you're not moving me off the ball, that will find a role. That will have a role in the NFL, and that will be a role that the Steelers would want him for. But again, we're probably talking fourth round at this point if you're waiting until that part to get him. And it would also depend on what kind of if they got a defensive lineman earlier, did they get a guy who could be that guy, or did they get another like smaller pass rusher type of guy who would more be suited to be kind of like what Keanu Benton is, whereas you want him in the 3 tech rather as like, the nose or the 0 tech.
I'm looking forward to us getting our Post-Gazette big board up, because if the national pundits aren't going to mock these guys to the Steelers, maybe we can use that as a jumping off point for conversation on some of these videos. But I'm looking forward to digging into that in some more detail in the coming weeks. Chris, a couple other names I wanted to get your take on quickly. They keep coming up in a ton of mocks. Sometimes when we do these mock draft videos, I don't highlight them because I don't want to talk about the same players every single week because that would get boring. But you should know Emeka Egbuka is still showing up in a ton of Steelers mock drafts. Matthew Golden from Texas, the wide receiver, still showing up in a ton of Steelers mock drafts. Chris, because we haven't had you on yet, I wanted to get your take on those two guys, and then maybe we can talk about anyone else that's sticking out to you this week.
So let's start with Emeka Egbuka. I think Emeka Egbuka is your Terry McLaurin of this draft. And Terry McLaurin went in the third, so maybe that's not fair. But like, he is all around. He has all the traits. He separates. He has good athleticism. He has really good hands, and he's a thinker. Like he's a leader. He's a good example setter, but he's also a thinker in football. He's a student of the game. And like, there's the clip out there from the national championship game when he drew up the play to say, hey, on this third down, we need to clinch the game out, set up our superstar on the other side of the field, Jeremiah Smith, I think his name is. But the other superstar wide receiver that Ohio State that was a freshman this year, I can't remember his name. I'm blanking on his name right now.
Jeremiah Smith. You had it.
It is Jeremiah Smith. Okay. Yeah. But like he was the one who was like, set this up, go and get here. And like for a dude to be that thoughtful, to be like, I'm gonna suggest a play that's not to me in this big moment, but to this other guy here, and to have it right, like that's a guy you want in your locker room. You want a playmaker like that, and he could be part of a winning culture on offense. And I think that that's a very good plus thing for him. The where I see for him versus Matthew Golden is I want to see these guys measurables. I think Matthew Golden could be a really explosive wide receiver who can be a big time playmaker on the outside. And these guys could have a lot of similar traits. I lean more to Egbuka because of the things that I've heard of him in the locker room. I haven't heard those same things out of Matthew Golden, but I also haven't that just hasn't been put in front of me because Matthew Golden didn't win the national championship and didn't get that highlight a little bit more. So, I look at those guys. Both of those guys are first round picks. If the Steelers ended up with either of those guys, I would take them over, say, like a Luther Burden, who's more like a slot guy who's really explosive. They already have slot guys, right? And Luther Burden is definitely a very, very good slot. He's not just Calvin Austin in the first round, right? But I think that the other guys that I've looked at here, Egbuka and Golden in the first round, those are guys that the Steelers come out with them. It's like, all right, that guy and George Pickens and then like Calvin Austin or whoever, Roman Wilson, whoever you put in the slot, that can be a receiving core of playmakers who can go get the football, beat cornerbacks regularly, and be some playmakers. So both of them would be pluses for the Steelers. I'd be in on either of those guys in the first round.
Yeah, I like Egbuka a lot, especially. I think all three of those guys that you mentioned, Chris, can go to places that Steelers receivers, the guys they have on the roster, cannot go and or will not go with the route running and the nuts and bolts of football. You've got a lot of speed in some circumstances. And granted, I haven't seen Roman Wilson yet, so maybe that changes my opinion at some point. But, Calvin Austin has speed. George Pickens has ability on the outside to go up and get it. Maybe you can burn some guys that way, but they don't have that kind of technical player, which was the foundation of what, I think made Antonio Brown so great, was he was just so technically good that they were able to get more out of him than his package may have suggested. And I think, that goes back to what you're saying about Emeka Egbuka being a student of the game. Chris, any other people sticking out to you either in mock drafts? And I know you're starting to look at film. So is there anyone that's jumping off the page at you?
So, okay. One guy that really stood out in the Senior Bowl that I think should be paid attention to a bit more is Jack Bech out of TCU. There's two TCU receivers. There's Savion Williams and Jack Bech. Now, Savion Williams jumps off the page at you because he's 6'5", so he's huge. He has that build, and he can be used all in different ways as part of the offense. He's intriguing. I think Jack Bech is the more pure receiver. I love the way he runs routes. I love the way he gets separation. I think he's a complete package type receiver. He'd be a second-round guy that I think the Steelers should take a serious look at, as they should with Jaden Higgins. I actually really like Jaden Higgins. Just some of the things I've seen out of him in the, just in the Senior Bowl and the few things that I've seen out of him playing so far. He's another one of my get him in the second round types of guys. And then you're pairing him with George Pickens and you're feeling really good about the future of your wide receiver room with him or a Jack Bech or a Golden or Egbuka. So at wide receiver, those are some guys there that I'd be really interested in. I look at if we're going to D tackle, because again, that's a priority for the Steelers. Again, this is just a deep draft class. When you look at it, we talked about the first round guys, Walter Nolan out of Ole Miss, Kenneth Grant out of Michigan, Tyleik Williams out of Ohio State. All three of those guys I really like. If they waited till later, Deon Walker, he just is a massive human out of Kentucky. He's 6'6", like almost 350, really big. But when you watch him in the Senior Bowl and you watch some of his highlights and you see some of the things that I've seen, like he wins a lot because he's big, and you want him to win with technique as well. And that's something that in the NFL, you can't just win being big. You got to be big and talented and athletic and technically sound. That's why Jalen Carter's so nasty. Jalen Carter does not just stand up as soon as the play starts and you get up into his chest and he's just stronger than you. No, Jalen Carter fires off the ball, pad level low, while also being just a complete massively athletic human being. And that's where Deon Walker has the massive part, but he needs to show more of the athletic part and he needs to show more of the technical part to be one of those guys. But like you said, Rylie Mills, another guy, that big category. I need to see more out of that. Like I said, Aeneas Peebles could be in that conversation as far as an interior defender. But one thing, a player that I said before that I think everyone should be paying close attention to see how does he move up the draft class is Azareya Thomas. His week at the Senior Bowl was just fantastic. And there are so many. He's 6'2". He looks like he could fly. Some of his highlights in college are really impressive. If he, like right now, a lot of people are projecting him as a third, second round guy at best. If he's there in the second round and the Steelers have taken it, like he would be tough to pass up. He looks like a pure line him up on the outside next to Joey Porter Jr. Those guys are going to beat up wide receivers for years together, be physical, and also have the athleticism to turn and run with the best of the receivers. But Azareye'h Thomas, that's one name that I have my eye on to see. Does he start shooting up draft boards? Do you start to see him get picked in the first round a bit more in mock drafts? Because if that happens, that means people are starting to catch on to the tape. And I think it will happen eventually. It'll just be depend on how high will his rides be. Because if you went on, like, say, Pro Football Focus and you did their mock draft simulator, right? Thomas right now, you could get in the third round where the Steelers pick. And like, that's just an insane steal right now. I don't think he's going to be there much longer. I think that if the Steelers can get him this year, it might be as a second rounder. Maybe he will have to be a first rounder. I'm not sure. But he's my guy that right now I'm looking at to see, like, hey, will people catch on to him? Because I think that he's, when you watch him, you're just like, oh yeah, that'll turn your head.
Yeah, there was a mock last week that did have him going to the Steelers in the first round, and my read was until you see a guy getting consensus first round buzz, right, you got to think about him in terms of the second round. So it will be interesting to see how his situation evolves through the combine, where you'll be going in a couple of weeks, Chris, and then at pro days and things like that. So, Chris, thank you for your time this week. Good stuff. Glad to finally have you on in this spot. Everyone else, Chris will be back Monday on the North Shore Drive podcast, talking more Steelers. I'll be back Thursday with Jason Mackey. So subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. If you enjoyed this video, please smash that like button. Help us out in the YouTube algorithm. We always appreciate that. And otherwise, we'll talk to you again next week.
Thank you for checking out this content from Post-Gazette Sports. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For all of the sports coverage the Post-Gazette has to offer, visit post-gazette.com.